So, okay, finally, our tech issues. This is our first live storm. This is our first live storm webinar, and I thought, okay, who can I get for this first live storm webinar? And I reached out to a good friend of mine, Atle Sheklund, and Atle endorsed Vivek Bhatt. Both of them are from Infotechtion, and Vivek is the CTO of Infotechtion. And uh, talk about being a small world, we've realized that we were working at Shell round about the same time in different areas of it. He was working in records management, and I was working for the unstructured data, the implementation of 365. um, so it's such a small world, and we I'm so privileged, and I think we're very lucky to have him here with us. He's done a lot of work with Microsoft on the records management portion of it. We're going to have a number of struggles with it, and having somebody like Vivek help us or explain to us the environment that Microsoft has prepared for 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 the M365 use in information and records management would help us a lot, because one thing that we're seeing is a lot of the terminologies are that we have in information records management are being used but may be interpreted in a different way. So we need that clarity from somebody who's actually done it several times, who's an expert on it. So guys, please welcome Vivek Bhatt of Infotechtion. Thank you so much, Vivek.
Thank you
And the
very
floor is
much.
yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the warm welcome. I hope you are still able to hear and see me and see the slides. If at any point you can't hear me clearly, Maria, can I leave it with you to just interrupt and let me know?
Yes, I will. I will do.
Okay.
I'll monitor them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have about best part of 1.5 hours to spend time with you. And thank you all so much for joining this session. Our discussion today will be around records management, and we will focus specifically records management in Microsoft 365. And here I'm going to talk about some critical success factors. I also have a demo of the whole solution, and I'm going to show some key aspects of records management and how Microsoft has developed the whole capability, what's new, what wasn't there before, and why Microsoft is now a platform that can be considered for records management, meeting regulatory requirements, and also proving some of the immutability concepts, which were very hard to implement in the previous incarnation of Microsoft products, mainly in SharePoint Online or previous SharePoint versions. We're also going to look at case study and lessons learned, and I have some call to action for you. And hopefully throughout the session, you will have a ton of questions. So please keep it live, and please send in your questions all throughout, and I'll do my best together with Maria to take up your questions right at the end. So we'll keep about 10 minutes or more to answer those questions for you. And I think, Maria, you wanted to do a quick poll in between the session. So I will go through my initial slides and until I get to a demo, and then I'll take a
Yeah.
quick pause. You can do your poll, and then I'll do the same thing, switch my screen, and actually just set up the demo instance.
Okay. Okay. I'll do that. I'll wait for your cue. Thanks, Vivek.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next screen now. Just a quick introduction of me. My name is Vivek. I'm based in London, United Kingdom, and I work for Infotechtion. My experience, best part of the last decade, has all been about records management, and especially working very closely with Microsoft and Microsoft product development team. I was very privileged to be part of a project engagement where the whole thinking around records management and shaping and bringing more compliance capabilities came into fruition. And so I've kind of learned a lot from that engagement and several other engagements which I've done since. And I specialize in how Microsoft have built their features into the product. And throughout this session, I will draw your attention to some of the key features. And one of the questions I received from Maria previously was regarding licensing. It's quite important to understand There are a lot of features, but they are not all available in the single licensing tier. So I'll call them out as much as possible. And if you have any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Okay, here are some of my details. Please feel free to connect with me afterwards or any follow-up questions after the session. Now, before we begin this session, I would like to just take a minute to acknowledge the unprecedented times that we are in. And I really do appreciate again that you're making all the effort in joining this session. It's really appreciated. COVID-19 is impacting everyone around the world in every aspect of our daily lives, and not just our personal and social lives, but also in a business context. So, we've seen kind of a significant rapid digital transformation, people working from home who are not used to working from home, and also has added an additional priority on organizations and companies to look after security, protecting the information, securing and think about information governance in general. So I don't seem to make this session being driven by COVID-19, but I do feel that this current situation and we are all working from home and using technology a lot more might make the session more relevant. And as clearly information security and protection is becoming top of mind for people. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of just say that before we move on and get on with the session. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next screen now on my slide. And I would like to start with some key challenges related to records management or managing your information, not just in Microsoft platform, but all up information, whether it is stored in SharePoint Online, your emails, local drives, local desktops, etc., etc. And these questions I've put together through a series of engagements that I've had every single time I speak to an expert or in records management, record managers or information managers, or even customers, where at the beginning of the engagement, there are some common questions, and I won't go through the details of it. I hope you relate to these questions, and perhaps something to think while I'm going through the rest of the slides is, are these questions relevant to you? And in fact, are there any other questions which are relevant to you and we haven't put them on the screen yet and you would like to hear more about those? Type them in through Q&A or improvements. So all of those improvement areas and question Q&As are very welcome, and we would like to discuss those. Nothing out of those. The one question where I would like to pick up, especially in context of Microsoft 365, is a number of customers are asking the question, where do I begin? I have a lot of these questions, and I'm being told Microsoft can answer all of these questions or a lot of these questions. But I also know that it's complex, and the whole state is filled with a number of features, a number of jargons. And so, what does it actually mean? And how do I begin? And how do I start my journey? And I want to be as quick as possible. I don't want to spend 4 years on a journey to actually follow a dream and then realize that I haven't actually implemented the right thing, and or the technology has moved on. So the customers are really interested in getting there fast, as quickly as possible, but making sure that they understand all the features and all the capabilities which Microsoft have built and baked into their products is being used in the right way. And yes, using as much product features as possible without investing any additional customizations or any add-on products. Can Microsoft out of the box meet my records management requirements? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. So let's talk about Microsoft compliance then. And one of my favorite quotes comes from one of my colleagues, Atle, and it goes something along the lines: when you buy a software as a service, especially these days, the only lasting asset is the information. And that's quite true, that we are living in a world where there's a more and more of cloud adoption. Companies own less and less of infrastructure, but the only thing that they own is data, or actually the information which is residing in data, because not all data is useful. It's the information and the knowledge which is in the data is helping organizations to make informed decisions. So that's where we want to focus on. And information and its governance is essential to an organization. It's essential to minimize risks, reduce costs, add value to information, and also identify new opportunities, especially now with this, digital transformation, organizations onboarding newer technologies. We are no longer just working out of Word documents or emails. We are increasingly attracted towards more digital modes of communication, such as chats, social media, and etc. And the more we engage with these products, tools, and methods of communication, we find ourselves that we are creating more and more knowledge, more and more information in different formats. And information governance is not just limited to just managing information in a record management system. The compliance needs to be demonstrated across all applications and all systems. And as the data grows, or rather explodes, as we are saying, in recent times, we kind of need this unified approach to discover information, um, classify and label information. And that really is going to be the core of our discussion today, is label. And especially as we cannot expect our users to find every single file and label every single file, which needs to be managed as a record. So it's really important to understand what methods, what options are available, should organizations need to invest in more automation capabilities, or stick to the more traditional methods of record management. We want to kind of understand what is the art of the possible, and then pick the right tool to do the right thing, which aligns with our business strategy or our vision for our organization. But one thing is clear: when we talk about records management, we are talking about increasingly in context of all information. And this information, I'll speak from a technology point of view, is your where your data is stored. If you're using SharePoint, it's stored in SharePoint, but it's also is stored in your Exchange mailboxes, your user mailboxes, where information is sitting in. And so that's where we are trying to focus on, and that's where we've been working very closely with Microsoft to actually understand how Microsoft tools and technologies can embed some of these governance controls right into those applications, so that you no longer have to invest, and should you choose to keep information in those applications, you have the tools to manage and apply governance controls and record management controls right in those applications itself. So if we look at the Microsoft compliance space, it's built on three key principles: is ability to discover and transform information, be able to understand, classify information, so that you have multiple dimensions attached to that information. It's no longer just keeping it in a folder, but identifying what other contexts are available to pick from a particular information, and then based on that apply label to that information, and then determine which controls those labels will enforce onto the information. And these could be either protection controls, which is things more around security. So a lot of customers have the need to identify security classification of information that people are sharing and keeping, and protecting confidential information. And so you are able to understand when you are able to understand the confidentiality of the information, you're then able to apply protection capabilities to it. So things like encryption, restricting access to only individuals who are authenticated and authorized, and also be able to, watermark. And there's a keen inclination towards, and I've seen this over the best part of 20 years now, that people like watermarking their documents. People like that footer which says this is a confidential information. So how do you kind of keep it current? And as the information changes, its security classification becomes from confidential to more publicly available. How do you make sure that you keep that current, and you just can't rely on people to change the watermark in every single file when it becomes public information? And so we are also looking at some of those aspects as well, to kind of bring in that productivity in Microsoft products as well, where there are Microsoft Office applications and Microsoft file types, to be able to control that journey as much as centrally and as much as in an automatic manner. We're not going to talk about that in detail in this session, but I just wanted to kind of show that that is also an aspect and a key area of focus in order to provide a comprehensive information governance. The other,
Vivek, I have a question from Lawrence here. Would He's got two questions. What is the amount of this process that can be automated so that users does not see them, but that the records management can set remotely? A related question is, how can he simplify the process so that users who do not want to have to think about retention periods can easily choose or identify what they need to do?
That's a really great question, and I'm glad you asked that question. I'm going to come to that. So there are a ton of features built in now in the product, and there are different ways by which you can you can make it seamless. And what we call is, in our definition, is compliance which is built into the system. We don't want users to think about, is this a legal document? Is this an audit document? Is it a contract document? We want users to be able to work with that information and read the signals and automate the process behind the scenes to be able to identify and apply the label. So there's a great deal of automation available. And recently, we've done quite a lot of work with Microsoft to also bake in machine learning capability as well into the system so that the system can continuously learn from the signals that it is receiving and actually train itself. Um, One of the things, so I'll cover some of that when I get to the demonstration part of it. But for the other, there might be people who are thinking, I don't want to automate that much. We still have those traditional methods of people going in, eyeballing, and understanding the information, and actually manually labeling files. Those options are all also available. But I've seen in my experience in the last 4 or 5 years that increasingly customers are actually realizing that at scale, it's not possible to do it. It's really great to understand the concept and trial it, but increasingly more and more customers are moving towards applying automatic policy-led actions onto information. Was there any other question, Maria, that you wanted to draw my attention to?
No, it's Lawrence who says, good to hear about machine learning. That is a welcome feature. Very pleased to see that potential.
I will, thank you. And I will, in the demo, give a very brief overview of machine learning and how you can actually, without having to engage with the users, use a small set of data to actually train the system and actually create your own models. And none of this requires coding, development. I won't even mention any scripts. And a lot of that work is actually just happening using the user interface, and you are able to kind of do it as long as you understand the concept. So that's a great thing. We're not, none of this that I will show in this session today and the demo will have any bit of customization. It's completely using Microsoft out of the box features.
Okay, and then Renee has, how can you get around having team owners from becoming SharePoint site collection administrators? This must be the SharePoint behind Teams, which is created from group, Vivek.
Yeah, so indeed, so that's one of the ongoing challenge that we are also um, um, seeing with the customers, that the team owners are also site collection administrators, and then that also has some overlap in terms of what they can do, and there's too much power there. So we are looking at that, and that's where it is not out of the box, and we have built in some processes behind the scenes so that the site collection administrator or the team owner has limited control on what they can do within a site collection. I won't have enough time to show you that, but if there is interest and you're keen on learning that, then I can take that as a follow on and perhaps share some information with you afterwards and after the session. Okay, so we talked about governance, and in governance, we are really going to focus today on record management, and what are the key constructs of records management which kind of matter. Make sure that we understand that, is Microsoft terminology aligns with the traditional record management terminology? What does it mean? So you already see that label is a new concept which we have not heard before. What does it actually mean? And different organizations may have different ways of calling things. So one of the customers I've been working with, and Maria just mentioned at the beginning, they had a concept of calling it as record type. I think it's quite common to call it record type, and we had to kind of go through that change and change that terminology to move from a record type to a retention label terminology, to so that we can align more closely with what Microsoft is calling it, and how those labels and those definitions are going to be made visible to them in the system. So we're going to touch upon that, and obviously, for an effective system and an effective management and monitoring of all your compliance controls that you're going to bake into the system, lies in a strong and robust capability to be able to manage those events. We are not just talking about reporting on how many records declared, how many records disposed, but we are taking it further, and we are trying to understand how can we proactively identify events which would create compliance incidents, for example, or compliance related concerns. And that was one of the key challenges that I showed on the screen, or the slide, on the previous slide, is a lot of customers are questioning, how do I know that the information now that is everywhere, how do I get a top down view of where my information is, where my records are, because it's a significant shift. Previously, I had a separate record management system and I could go in there and find everything. Now information is going to be everywhere, and people are going to declare records in multiple places. How do I make sure that I have the right information architecture available so that I can define where my record should be? And afterwards, how do I provide some analytics and insights to be able to monitor and report on my compliance activities? So we're going to we're working on things like policy violations. Microsoft has a great product which they have released recently, about insider risk management, which allows you to track specific events, and for compliance administrators to track and piece those events together and determine where there is a data leakage value scenario which needs to be addressed in a proactive manner rather than after the event. And all of that is available not just in SharePoint, is available across devices, apps, cloud services. Not all of the record management features are available everywhere, but that's the vision that Microsoft wants to take these features, protection and governance and management features, to each and every application and device, so that you have a consistent experience, no matter whether you are in a Microsoft Word document or an Excel document. You have the same experience of information governance and noticing and identify where your records are. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, and let's focus on the main topic, which is um, retention labels. And before we get to the retention labels, very quickly, please think about your information architecture. How you're going to organize and structure your information is very important, especially with the rapid adoption of Teams. And a number of customers that I work with have concern over how Teams is being rolled out, the information governance controls, while the technology isn't quite 100% there. How do we make sure that there is information governance and record management capability built into Teams and other products so that it is structured properly from the initial rollout, rather than having to do a project 2 years from now where your Teams proliferation has gone quite significant and it's no longer a small number to deal with. So let's come back to retention labels now, and we're going to talk about retention labels in Microsoft 365. Just very high level view. Retention labels are first configured in a Microsoft portal called Compliance Center, and it's role based access, and it's a compliance administrator role who can centrally go in and configure retention labels and create a file plan. We're going to have a look at file plan and what does it actually mean in Microsoft terminology. And so that's a single place from where you can create your retention labels, or if you know them as retention schedule, retention periods. There are different names for it, but Microsoft terminology is retention label. So you can create your retention label, and for each retention label, you can give a certain attributes to it, and then you can also determine what kind of actions you want to deploy and where do you want to deploy those retention labels, and how do you want those retention labels to be applied. So it's all centralized management. You no longer have to go and deploy them to individual site collection. You can actually do a tenant-wide deployment.
Vivek, Jane Profit was asking, can you set labels at folder level?
Yes, indeed, you can absolutely set at the folder level. And well, when we get to the demo, and if I have time, I will very quickly show you. You can set a retention label to a library as a default, and there is an option there to also determine whether you want to set the default label and apply it to only the new files which are coming into a library, or you want it to be applied to existing files as well. And similarly, you can go a level down and you can apply a label to a folder within a library as well. And that would mean that any file coming into that folder will automatically inherit that label.
But Vivek, do we? Because I've always said that I don't encourage anything lower than a folder for management purposes. So, uh, do we do we say that it's best to apply it at a minimum folder level and not go into each content type so that it's easier to manage?
Well, yes. So the recommendation is, and as I've increasingly seen, is that applying label manually at a file level is becoming a very narrow use case. And there are
Yes.
still scenarios where you would still have the need to for the user to actually determine and say, hey, I want to apply this label to this file, but increasingly becoming a very narrow use case scenario. The more broader scenarios are either defaulting at a higher level, so do it at a site collection level or a library level, or really organizations are moving towards automation. So can I understand what properties exist in files, and based on those, can I build a rule in my compliance center so that all information meeting that rule would be declared as a record. And one common example is that customers choose to kind of keep a column in SharePoint called information status, and they kind of default it. And when users kind of work with that information, they can change it to final, etc. And then you can build your rules behind the scenes to say, hey, when the information status is final, I want you to apply this particular label.
Uh, Kate Bolsover is asking association of a label with a specific content type.
Yes,
Yes.
indeed, that is also a feature, and and you can. There's a whole host of things that you can automate there. You can attach your label to a content type, and in that case, you might be using a specific content type. Let's say, tax or invoice content type, which is you don't know which site collections are there, but you know the content type, and you can just build that in and send it off to all site collections, and it will just pick up. And you might have multiple content types, but it will only pick up files which are associated with the tax or invoice content type and apply labels accordingly.
Okay. And Jane just mentioned, can you set at document level any? Oh, yes. That Vivek mentioned that, Jane. So yeah.
So document level is the most classic and the most basic form which is available, and that's how I remember that 5 years ago when Microsoft and I was working with Microsoft to build some of these and design some of these features. The very first feature which came out was, can you apply a label to a single file? And that was the first feature, and that still remains. And there are scenarios where people actually prefer actually using that method.
Yeah. It's just a big management scenario.
It is indeed, indeed, and I feel that I've seen this several times now, and there is a pattern. People always start with, and this is actually a good way to start your adoption journey, to kind of do your trials using some manual labeling scenarios, so you can actually trust the system. You build a trust with the system, and then go on to more automation and more machine learning type capabilities. Okay. Um, Deployment, as I said, deployment is possible centrally to SharePoint sites, Exchange mailboxes, Teams, OneDrive for Business, etc. And I wouldn't recommend choosing all of these locations for record management. And so, for example, one of my customers has made a conscious choice that they do not want records in OneDrive for Business. And anybody who wants to declare a record needs to bring that information into SharePoint sites because it's more collaborative, more shared space, and there is a more shared ownership of those records rather than records sitting in OneDrive for Business.
Vivek, Jane is also asking, are you going to discuss automation for retention
I
on
am
the demo? Yeah.
in the demo very quickly. I will show you some things which are already set up, very briefly. But we can obviously follow up, and if you guys have more questions, I can set up another session to give you a deep dive on it. Um, the other thing is that it's immutable. Record configuration is immutable, and the configuration as such itself, when you create a label and retention period, there are aspects of it once you create you cannot change, and it's immutable. Not even Microsoft, not even writing a code, you can change it. And also, when you apply a record label to a file, that file is also immutable. Now, there is a difference, and we will come to it a bit later on, and I'll explain the difference between when it's immutable and there are certain roles which can remove the label, and when there are certain types of record labels which are completely immutable for legal and regulatory purposes. Number four, there is also now file plan. It's a very recent addition to labels, and so we're going to cover in the next slide what does actually file plan mean. But you are now able to associate your organizational context, your legal citations, etc., on your file plan. There's obviously different triggers in the configuration option for a label, which is number 5. So there's a whole host of things that you can define your label on, and and especially event records. Microsoft SharePoint never had an event model for managing retention periods and disposition. You now have that ability, and there's a separate module itself which lets you track and manage events and trigger events, for example, employee leaving the company, and based on that, calculate the disposition date, etc. Number 6 is various methods of disposing information. One of the earlier features was just automated, but now you have a couple of options to pick from. We'll look at it in the next slide. And then number 7 is that you are able to apply a whole host of options. We talked about it briefly. You can automate it significantly without writing a piece of code. And so you always have that bulk or manual deletion where you can select multiple files and apply a label. You also have container defaults like library, folder, etc. And then you have query-based automation, which basically content types and metadata fields.
Vivek, I have two questions for you. First one from Fiona. Does SharePoint now have the same records management capability of third-party applications such as Record Point and AI? I think is automated intelligence.
Yes. I know both of those products very well.
Mm.
Worked with them quite closely previously. So two of my customers were third-party product vendors were initially identified. In fact, 6 years ago, when I did the assessment of replacing this customer's record management platform with SharePoint Online, my recommendation was you need a third-party add-on product. You can't do it out of the box. But with this record management capability, we've gone completely out of the box, and we are not leveraging any of the third-party add-on products for record management.
Okay. Penny is asking, is the file plan label available with E3, please?
No, the file plan
Yeah.
label is not available. I'm going to draw your attention to that
Yeah.
differentiation. So it does, although this is all sounds great that it is able to replace third-party products, but it does have a license add-on to it, which is worth understanding. In our experience, and we don't sell licenses for Microsoft at all, but in our experiences where the customers have done the assessment, we found that a third-party product or an add-on third-party product combined with E3, the cost of 2,000 users, and a Microsoft add-on, kind of pays for about 20,000 users. So I won't talk at all about licensing, pricing, etc. But at the end of this session, I have some reference materials which are a good source for you to understand and compare licensing. Then number 8, very quickly, is you have label specific events as filters. And so this is where Microsoft has really you brought it tightly together. Not just it provides you the ability, and where Microsoft previously has been quite scoring quite low is the auditability. What has happened in the system. So even if you were able to declare records, the audit log was quite weak, and the ability to audit on specific events was very weak. And that's why Microsoft has done quite a lot of effort. There are a ton of audit filters behind the scenes, which you can combine with the existing audit filters to draw a really useful and interesting picture on and understand what's happening within your landscape related to records management, whether it is you're trying to understand, how many dispositions, how many event records, but also importantly, has someone tried to delete a file which was declared as a record type event, or has someone raised a request for changing the label as a result of regulatory change, and how that has been audited and how it's been preserved, so that you can have a defensible response when it comes to auditors.
Okay, Vivek, I've got well, two questions. One I've asked. So Penny was asking if you know the name of the add-on license. I did say it will be on the reference that you will provide, unless you want to give it now. Then
It will be under the reference, but it is called either the E5 add-on license, and Microsoft has now recently changed it to Microsoft Information Governance add-on license, which is a very specific record management pack. So you don't have to buy an expensive E5, and you can kind of just pick which components that you want, and it's all bundled into Microsoft Information Governance. This was previously known as Advanced Data Governance. But in the references, I will have a link which will give you a full comparison of all the features across E3, E5, and the add-on features.
okay. Graham says, will there be a way to obviously highlight to a typical user what the retention policy is within a folder slash area within 365?
So it's a folder does give you an indication what is the retention label applied, and we'll see that in the demo. And I'll just very quickly draw your attention to it. And so as at the file level, it tells you, and at the file level, you can also determine when would that file expire. So an end user can go in and actually check, open the file and see when is this record expected to be expired. They can't change that. They can't modify that in any shape or form, but it's an
But
information piece
they're
for them.
okay, but they're aware of it.
Yeah.
Fiona, lots of talk in my organization about using folders, but going down a metadata route, this worries me in terms of applying retention labels. Are there any pitfalls to be aware of? Wow. This has been ongoing for a long time,
Yes,
folders
and
and metadata.
that debate, folder versus metadata, is just going on since SharePoint came into existence, and that has divided people. And what I tell people is that there is a place for both. Both live together. I have seen people who have gone extreme metadata and then created problems for themselves, and I've also seen that with extreme folder situation. So it really is a combination and a balance, and that's why your information architecture is really, I cannot stress upon how important your SharePoint architecture is, because that
Mm,
really determines how you find information, how you add context to that information. And it isn't complex at all. It requires a little bit of planning and a little bit of strategy work in the beginning, but once you have done that, you're kind of set in using your SharePoint structures effectively. So my answer would be that it's a combination of both, and use folders where they make sense, but definitely use metadata, because metadata defines the context, and the automation that you're able to drive, especially in context of protecting your information, applying record management control, becomes significantly more easier if you have metadata applied to it. But you don't have to force your users to fill in that metadata. There are methods available now where you can automatically fill as much as possible, and all your users are doing is actually just coming into that area and just working with information.
yes. And from Anthony, will M365 work in conjunction with third-party Outlook management applications such as Harmony, Coligo, on sending emails through to SharePoint, and then M365 adds the retention labels and capture metadata?
So it does work, although I have seen that I'm not sure how much Coligo had changed their product, but all of
Yeah.
these product vendors had to align their product to work with retention labels. So it doesn't work if you have your product right now. It will just not work like this. And I'll tell you where it will not work is because these interfaces have have a user experience where they provide you options to select metadata, and they have to make that change to be able to surface which retention labels are available in that particular location. But there are ways around it. If you are looking at more automated record declare where you don't want users to pick up, then those tools should just automatically work without having to make any changes.
Okay. Jane mentioned mentions again that uh, she has a client that will use metadata as opposed to folders, so she's interested to know of any impact where you use metadata, where folders should be used, or where you use folders where metadata should be used. Maybe the impact
So
of that.
I will come back to it a bit later on.
Okay.
But overall, I think that's a slightly longer discussion. And one quick example where I've seen people using folders is for example certain libraries, and especially I've seen in let's say tax situation, and the tax teams have their own specific way of grouping information, and they have rather large amount of documents and tax and invoices that they receive, and they quite often like to use folders with metadata defaulted on those, so that they can have their workflows built in to put information into the right folder. um, and there are some best practice guidelines that we've kind of, they're not Microsoft, but we kind of always tell people, if you need to create folders, don't go below a certain level.
Yeah.
You have a level 1, level 2, but that's the max that you should go. Beyond that, you start to create a level that you will always have very difficulty in finding that information.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of subjects here that sounds like we need a second, a second deep dive on. But Gordon says, do all users have to have the add-on pack for E3 or just certain users? Ah, the
Well,
loophole.
yeah, that is actually a really good question. So it really depends who is going to declare records, right? So if you go in with a setup where you have dedicated site collections in SharePoint, which are site collections where you will keep records. So the licensing is user-based. So if those site collections where records are managed are only managed and controlled by defined roles, etc., like record managers or compliance managers, then you only need to license those users, because you're not going to deploy record management control to the other areas, because those areas become collaboration areas. However, if your users are going to be using all information across all site collections, then you will need to license your users.
Thank you, Vivek, because that's one of our in consultancy. That's one of the things that we have in our backpack, don't we?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there are scenarios that customers have to license everybody, but there are ways around it. Obviously, we, as Microsoft partner, we always recommend that license, where, license as much as you need, keep some buffer to make sure that you are getting the right value, and you're also be able to demonstrate compliance back to Microsoft that you're using the licensing for the right purpose. But yes, that is a discussion that can be had as a follow up for sure.
Yep.
Okay, so just a little bit further on retention labels before I make a pause and hand over for the poll. So retention label has actions and controls and file plan. So those are, there's a lot of things within retention label, but these are the three key ways I find it easy to inform my users and my stakeholders how they should see a retention label. So a retention label actions can be, you can either keep it for retaining the information only and then do nothing after the retention period is over, which means the information stays where it is, but it is just protected for that period. And after that, there's no action on it. You can either create an action to say retain and delete, which means it will be protected for the period of retention period, and then it will be deleted. And then you also have options to how you want to delete it. Or you can configure your label to delete only. Now that's actually quite important. That's not record management, but this retention label is quite multi-purpose. So organizations do tend to use this delete only option where they want to apply an organization-wide policy. So think of a scenario where you would say, I'm going to apply this delete only action to all information in my organization, so that any information, let's say not modified for longer than 3 years, is automatically deleted. And in order to preserve records, I'm going to deploy another policy which is going to be very, very specific and apply record management controls, so that you are then able to focus on specific information, but you also have an organization-wide policy which is kind of getting rid of data that people are not filing as records, not using it, but it is piling onto your system, and it is preventing you from making, informed decisions. In terms of controls, you have a period, and that is where you have a number. You can say how many days, how many months, how many years, and you can define a number against it. And the maximum it goes to is 99 years, and that's the limitation in the system. That if you want to keep anything for more than 100 years, you might want to consider is actually making them as permanent rather than defining a retention period to it.
Vivek, so there's Lawrence has a question here, which he asked a couple of minutes ago. Does immutable mean never deleted or no change? Because in financial sector, it's like no change. The
Yeah.
deletion, yeah, is an
So
action.
let me come to that. I'm just few clicks away from that
Oh,
particular
okay, perfect,
question.
perfect.
So just quickly cover triggers. So you have two types of triggers. You could do a trigger on date, and date could be either created, modified, or the date the label is applied. Or you can do it on event. So things like an event could be an employee leaving the company. And when an employee leaves the company, then an event needs to be triggered. Disposition, you can have disposition automated, which means if you have selected retain and delete, and the disposition is automated, information will be automatically deleted at the end of its retention. You also have manual disposition, whereby at the end of the retention period, you could trigger a sort of a workflow where somebody will get a notification, hey, these files tagged against these retention labels are now due for disposition, go in and review, and then you can take one of those actions. And there's a user interface for that where you can say, hey, I'm happy with it, dispose it, or no, I want to keep it for a longer time, can I extend it? And you can always say, I don't want to take any action. And in that case, it will continue to send you reminders. Then comes the record. So a retention label, unless configured with this specific checkbox, is not a record label, and it does not apply any immutability controls. So everything that you've seen so far is E3, and that's where E5 or the add-on component comes in, is you check that box, and then it becomes a record and it applies immutability control. Now with this record, there are roles which can remove that label once the record is declared and are able to make certain changes. So things like if you are a site collection administrator or a higher privilege, you have the ability to change that record label to another label or remove it entirely. And as a result, Microsoft has now invested into a different type of record label configuration. It's called regulatory record. It's right now going into private preview with customers, but this is a truly immutable record. And this is Microsoft's response to things like worm compliance, etc., where in financial sector, you don't even want the administrator to be able to delete the record or remove the record label. So in this instance, when a regulatory record label is applied, nobody can remove that label, and nobody can change that label. Once it's applied, then there is no going back. It becomes immutable in a true sense.
Okay, so Lawrence, that cannot be deleted or changed.
Okay.
B-
Please go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but you mentioned financial services industry, which is highly regulated. But does it comply with the SEC regulation where in terms of where does Microsoft actually store it? Because in financial services, what they don't want is it being mixed with non-records. So is it going into Azure to say that it's in another place, or is it staying in place?
So it's that's where your information architecture comes in. How you architect your platform, you can keep them mixed with records, but you can also keep them separately. And when you keep them separately, they go into different content database, different area, and you can define that. And with that, you kind of within the same tenant, you are able to create that physical separation.
Thanks, Vivek.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly go through this. I'm conscious of time. So in file plan, you obviously have a name, you have a description, and there are two types of descriptions. You have a description for administrators, which the admins when they're using the label and you can give some hints and tips about it. But there's also a description for users. So if you choose to deploy a label to a SharePoint site where you want the label to be visible and you want the user to apply that label, then there's a just-in-time help for them before they apply the label, and you can configure that centrally. So it's quite useful for those manual labeling scenarios where you want to give them, examples of files, type of information that people should be using when applying a label. Then there is a file plan descriptor, and where you kind of come into more traditional file plan, setup. So each label has a reference, and record managers love that feature where you are able to code your label and say, it is ADMO 101 or LEGO 102. For example, you can define that reference now. You can also define a business context. So who owns that? So certain record types, if they're owned by legal versus certain record types which are owned by finance. So you can provide that organizational context. You can also build your own category, and there are two levels of categories that you can build within the system. So you can custom define and create your own business. So each one of these you can customize. When I say customize, you can configure it. You can also define the authority. So is it legal, regulatory, or any other authority? You can again add that value yourself, and there are some built-in features. And finally, you can also select from a pre-built citations within the system, and you can add your own citations. So which law, which regulatory requirement is actually driving this particular this particular label. And then finally, you have a label policy through which you can centrally deploy your file plan, your record labels to any of these Microsoft 365 platforms, from SharePoint Online to Teams. I'm going to pause here, Maria, and if you want to take the
Oh,
time now to do your poll, I'm just going to quickly set up my demo, come back, and if people have more questions, I'll take the questions first and then get into the demo.
yes. So everyone, this is my bad. As I mentioned, this is our first live store meeting with IRMS Scotland. So what I have on the chat window right now is a link for everyone who would give authorization for Infotechtion, where Vivek asked to be contacted by them. So if you wish to be contacted by them and given more information about these things, please click on that link and put your name in. So put your name in, and okay. So put your name in, and I will provide your email addresses to Vivek, because I wasn't able to put that authorization in when you registered for this one. So I want to make sure that I only give him the email addresses of those people who wish to be contacted. Thank you, guys. And Vivek is just preparing the demonstration for this, which is really good, especially for those of you who have administrative rights to your 365. Then this would be very good. So please feel free to click on the form while Vivek is preparing for his demonstration.
Hello, can I check, Maria?
Hello. Yeah, you've got the mirroring at the moment instead of
Uh-oh.
earlier I saw the SharePoint already. So
Can you see now?
yes, that's perfect. That's a
Okay.
compliance center now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are you happy for me to go through the demo now?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm very conscious of time. We only have 29 minutes left.
Yes.
I have quite a lot of slides to go through. So let me just share my screen first very quickly. I am going to cover three scenarios. One is creating and configuring labels. How do the labels, when they appear in end user experience, how do the users see them? Just very quickly draw your attention to applying defaults, etc. And also a feature that Microsoft has recently released, and something I've worked very closely with Microsoft on, managing record revisions and what kind of scenarios we see where users or end users or compliance administrators feel the need that they need to create a new revision from that record, but they don't want to change the link because in certain instances you might have a safety regulation information, health and safety critical information that you've shared it out already, published onto your web page, but simply because you have a record and you want to create a new revision for it, you don't want to change the hyperlink. So we'll look at that very quickly. Okay, so am I back onto the
Compliance center.
Compliance
Yeah.
Center? Okay,
Yeah.
great. So very quickly, what you see on the screen is the Microsoft Compliance Center. On the left-hand side, there are a ton of features here, which provide a number of capabilities, from performing a centralized e-discovery to connecting to other systems and bringing the information and analyzing that information and managing them as records. So things like organizations are increasingly trying to connect into LinkedIn, other forms of applications which businesses use for communication, like chatting, etc. In finance organizations, kind of use ice chat and some other products. So how do we bring that information or connect to those applications and identify any sensitive information which is in there, and either take some actions, I delete information, etc., or identify records from there and then manage them as records. We also have features here which are related to reporting, insights, auditing, etc. So it's for a compliance administrator, that's this one-stop shop for you, where you can come in and look at everything related to managing compliance in your organization. And obviously records management is a part of it. So I'm going to go left here and expand, and I will see here records management. And when I load records management portal, which should come in a minute, it has certain pre-built features, and you can change some of those and use some of those existing Microsoft features. So on the front page itself, it shows you if there are any dispositions which are pending and how is your label activity. So it has some visual cues that help you understand, kind of go and deep dive into and analyze your information. We talked about file plan, and we have file plan over here, which allows you to manage your file plan. And so, for example, here I'm able to group my information by, let's say, function or department, and I can see all my labels which are HR versus legal versus asset management. And I can also create new labels here and publish them out. Let's have a look at a label, and we created by selecting a retention label. Very quickly, you can enter a name. So, for example, in this case would be information technology projects. Here I can give a description for admins, and I can give a description for users. And I will show you one of the examples on how they actually appear. The description for users is the one which appears to the end user when they see a label. You can then apply file plan descriptors. And so, for example, you can have a reference ID here or build your own reference ID, and you can add it to a list. And next time you create a label, you get to see that label as well. You can select which business organization. So there's already a predefined set here, but at the end you can create your own as well. So you don't have to stick to Microsoft's organization structure. If your organization has different names for different businesses and functions, you can create that very well here. And then you can select categories, authority types, and this is what I meant. You have citations and link to that particular citation. And if you don't find the one which is matching, which quite often is the case because there are only 4 or 5 which Microsoft has provided, you can add your own citation over here. All of this is optional, so I'm just going to skip for now so that I can quickly show you some other features. And here is in the label settings, you determine what kind of controls you want to apply and what actions you want your label to take when it is applied to something. So retain the content, you keep it for a number of years or months, you can set up it here. These are the 3 actions I talked about. One of the recommendations that we give to our customers is that plan your labels where you want to consider a disposition review or a manual disposition. I'd be surprised if organizations have all labels for manual disposition. That's going to be in long term quite difficult, as more and more information will be declared as record. And something I've seen in past 10 years is that where it might not be the case with yourselves, but the organizations that I've worked, the option people picked was delay the disposition, because people who actually were in charge then 10 years ago, and some of these retention periods are rather long, 40 years, 50 years, 99 years. And so you don't really want to configure such records which trigger a disposition review at the end of 99 year, because the people who would have declared those files may not be there to actually help you with that.
Vivek, I have 3 questions. Sorry.
Okay.
So Matthew says, if you want the system to email someone to trigger a retention review, what happens if that person has left in the meantime? Do you have to go through and manually change who the email goes to?
Yes, you can come here and change that. We recommend that instead of putting a person's name, you put a mailbox name. So you could have a shared mailbox or a Teams mailbox where you can put the name in there, so that it's not an individual who gets an email, but it's a mailbox which gets an email, which is a shared mailbox, either a team or a shared mailbox, and a group of people monitor it.
Is it, Renee says, is it true if you set up review for disposition, anyone who is the nominated person to review can view all records that are needed for reviewing, even if it's not their nominated records?
Yes, so this review actually works at the label level. So you are setting up a disposition at a label level, so not at the individual file level. And whoever is nominated will then be in control of determining any files which are labeled against it, review the files, and then determine the disposition.
Retention labels and can they work with any type of file, example videos, or is it just Office type files?
Any type of files. Any type of file that you can upload in SharePoint, and now Microsoft has lifted all restrictions on any type of file. So there are no file types in SharePoint that can't be uploaded. So any file that you can upload in SharePoint, or OneDrive for Business, or Exchange, or in Teams, you can apply retention label to those.
So Sean Astiel, I thought that disposition review required an E5 license. Has that changed now to E3?
No, disposition review
always
is always E5. Disposition review, yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so you delete the content automatically, and then you determine based on label or an event, and this is the most important feature. So this what makes your whole capability E5 or the add-on feature. So you select that, and then in order to use this feature, you need the add-on license. Once you do that, you can create the label, and then once the label is created, it's ready for use. Okay, so let me just show you how the label is deployed, and that's where we come into label policies. I'm going to pick one scenario which people were quite interested in, is auto application. So here is one example which I've used to deploy a label using the machine learning capability. Okay, So I'm just going to be able to show you the configuration. I won't be able to show you how it actually works because it does, when you deploy, it does take a while to do it. It's not instantaneous. And so here I have a label where I have created a number of machine learning rules, and I'm able to pick the information types. So for example, things like credit card number, and this is just for test purpose. And I can manage all of that. And based on this, the information will find and look within the document. And that's where the file format comes into play, that if you are looking to auto apply information and you want the information, the policy to look at the content of the information, then determine whether it matches certain rules like machine learning rules, or it contains credit card number or not, and then take some actions, then you need that in a readable format that Microsoft can read. And there are a ton of formats which Microsoft supports now, not just the Office documents, or things like PDF, etc. So it's kind of growing, but already quite a wide range of file types which Microsoft support. And with this, you can add as many conditions as you like to kind of really build in this framework and then deploy this policy. And then actually it finds the information within your estate and then deploys it against. And you can also choose where this condition is deployed. So for example, in this case, I have decided to choose specific locations. I don't want this employee data identification to Exchange or OneDrive accounts. I want it specifically on SharePoint. And I know that there is one SharePoint site collection which is used for keeping HR data. So in that case, I'm able to actually go granular and target specific sites to make sure that I only apply these rules to specific areas. Of course, I can also go down the other way, and I could say, I want to apply everywhere, but I might want to exclude something. So you also have that option. Now, the limitation there is that you can only pick a maximum of 100 site collections for SharePoint. And if you choose Exchange mailboxes, that limit goes up to 1,000, but there is always an upper limit to how many of those granular applications that you can make. Okay. Please.
Oh, it was just a note to say that they did see the disposition review on E3 on a previous slide. So we'll just have a quick look at it later on.
Sure. Okay. And then you have events, and this is where you can create your events and manage your event types. And I'm going to just show you very quickly. So this is the label policy I've published already. And here I've included 2 records, employee records and internal audit. And one of them is an event-based record. And that record, that label, I have associated with a specific event called employee leaving the company. And so there are options available where I can come in, and if my HR team has notified that this person, or Joe Doe or somebody else is actually leaving the company, then I can come in and trigger that against all information which is tagged for that employee. There are options available whereby you can integrate now this with your system. So if you have an HR system, like Workday or SAP or any other system, you can build that integration so that when the employee leaves, and based on certain triggers in that application, it sends a signal directly to Compliance Center, and it automatically creates that event and sets the event date for all of those records within the system. Okay, so I'm just going to cover this part. In the Compliance Center, there's a lot of stuff that needs to go through, and I'll be happy to know at the end of the session, if you like another session, then I can definitely walk you through that. So very quickly, we are into SharePoint. And in SharePoint, we have now some of these new modern features. So this is the modern experience. I'm going to go to site collection. In my area, this is my front page, so won't go into the details of it. But here I've created a test library where I have, for human resource and health, I have an employee docket library. And this is where HR, for example, this might give you some clues into folders versus metadata. HR, for example, like to keep an employee docket, and you could choose an employee docket by creating library, or in some cases, HR chooses to create an employee docket by creating folders or document sets. And so that's a very common method by which you can combine metadata with folder, but not actually creating a proliferation of your folders within your library. And in this instance, when I select a particular file, I then have my labels applied. And if I can draw your attention to the right-hand side, when this information loads, I will see a bunch of options. So that's the metadata. And so I have two options here. I have a metadata, which I've already set to draft. But if I had set in my library to final, I would have a policy created, which would have just picked up the information status. And where it is final, would declare those files as records without the user having to do any intervention. So very useful when you have scenarios like tax invoices, where people are receiving information and uploading them into the system, and they don't want to go through that additional step of actually selecting them and applying labels. You can automate all of that process. You have things like legal entity, etc. So we have defaulted all of those. So when we upload a file, none of that metadata pops up, and it's automatically applied to the files. But now here I see an applied attention label. And I see this applied attention label because I have deployed that label, and I have chosen to explicitly deploy a label policy and display two labels here. And you see when I hover over the mouse, it gives me a little window and shows me a little detail about it that I can now understand which label, which type of information I should be labeling. So like absence authorization, employee timesheet, etc., etc. So it kind of gives me an indication that I shouldn't be using this label for applying a label to an employee audit report. I already have another label called employee internal audits, right? So this is the scenario where you go really classic record management. You are expecting users to declare those records. So I just wanted to kind of show you what does the look and feel is for an end user. So all of that complexity that you saw on my slides and behind the scenes, what it translates into a very simple interface that users all they have to do is just pick up. But of course, we want to make it super simple for those, and that's where we go into sort of more auto application scenarios. So if I apply this internal audit label, it will apply the label, and it will save, and now it has become a record. And you see instantly, without even refreshing my page, I see the retention label applies is internal audits, and I would then be able to see when does it expire. Now, if I try and delete this file, it will give me an error that I can't delete this file. Okay, so that was a quick demonstration of how do you declare a record. Let me just very quickly cover managing record revisions. So imagine this scenario that you have employee audit report for 2018-2019. You can obviously upload different files with different file names, but some organizations and some users choose to kind of deploy as a new version. So I have an employee audit report. It's probably not a very good example, but I, let's say, have a strategy or a design or a safety critical information that I want to upload here, but I have a revision to make. How do I make sure that when I have to revise that information, I don't impact the immutability of my record that was previously declared, but at the same time, I'm able to create a new revision without having to change the link of that. And because that link might be embedded in lots of different places. And if I change the file, or if I have a new version as a different file, I then now have to distribute that link everywhere. So Microsoft has developed this new feature and called Manage Record Revisions, also known as Advanced Versioning. It allows you to create a new revision from a file. And it's simply done by swiping this particular lock slider on the right-hand side. And what it actually does behind the scenes is actually it preserves the latest version that you had declared as a record, keeps the same label, keeps the same expiry date, keeps all the same. It takes a snapshot of it and keeps it as a record connected to this file, and it keeps it in a hidden place. You can go in your version history and see and access that record. And now this record has become editable. And I can go and make changes to this and add new versions. And when I'm done with my changes, I can lock it, and that will create a new record. So over time, you see that you are building a stack of records which are created from a single file without impacting the immutability of those files. And when those records are kept safely in a hidden location, they can't be changed and the labels can't be removed from there. Now, this is only possible for the record retention label. This feature is not available for regulatory record. So you cannot create revision because it's immutable. And once applied, you can't lock and lock, you can't make any changes to it. Okay, so that is, in a very nutshell, the things I wanted to show you. There's a ton of things in here that I'll be really excited to kind of show you again. But I do want to go back to my presentation and cover some of the other topics. Okay, so so next we are actually, I'm just conscious of time, Maria. We only have 9 minutes left. Do we have, I haven't had a look at the Q&A. Would you suggest that we go to the Q&A?
We have some questions, and I'm sorry, my connection is not very good. I'm loading some of the questions, but you can continue, Vivek. I will just.
Okay.
So, we still have 85 people on the webinar.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about some critical success factors that you can take away from this. And the first critical success factor I want to talk about is developing an IG strategy. And I was quite pleased to see a lot of questions about not just about record label, but about SharePoint. How do you structure it, metadata versus folders? It is really important to have a vision on what you're trying to achieve from your record management project or in general with your information governance. And really important to align with your business objectives and what your company is trying to achieve and tie that into your vision. It's really important to identify what your success factors are, because once you define your success factors, you can then map your achievements against that success factors. And it's really crucial when you get into the implementation stage, because people tend to have a different view when they start, and when they actually start to implement, there seems to be a lack of buy-in from either the end users or stakeholders. So I would strongly recommend that invest in an information governance strategy, develop your success factors, develop your requirements. And in that way, where we are going with requirements these days is actually we're focusing a lot more on use cases. We don't find that writing 100, 200 requirements, long list of requirements is actually proving useful. And we rather focus on create use cases. And use cases have personas, they have a business aspect to it, and they are contextual. And so they are the way to go. And use cases you can really quickly get on board, and you don't have to spend months and months of time on writing requirements. And that part becomes really easy if your organization is trying to meet certain compliance guidelines or some regulation or certification, then their requirements are already quite strict, and then you focus on use cases. Make sure that you implement a blueprint. A blueprint is a high-level design, a structure to understand whether that structure will meet all your success criteria or not. And perhaps do a proof of concepts. Don't invest into a significant program. Do some proof of concepts, do some trials to see is that structure, is that configuration meeting your requirements. That POC is not to prove whether records management works or not. That POC is really to prove whether you are able to structure and configure your infrastructure in a way that it would work and it would make easy for your users and provide a step change in the user experience. And then finally, invest in planning. Think about quick wins. Don't wait for the entire solution to be deployed everywhere so that then people will use it. Start with quick wins, such as, can I get started with SharePoint first before I start thinking about Exchange Online or email scenarios? And build that into your business case and really identify your benefits of change. I struggle a lot of the times that where organizations do not have a tangible benefit, there isn't a significant cost factor. You're not going to be able to save significant amount of infrastructure costs because a lot of this is already on cloud. But if you are, then that's great. but some of the legal compliance and regulatory benefits are rather intangible.
Thank you so much. And here are the questions from Lawrence. Just to check, does the add-on license give the functionality? By that, I mean we do not need the full E5, just extra features through the IG add-on license mentioned earlier.
Correct.
Yep. Does the machine learning include text such as keywords or key phrases?
So machine learning at the moment only, yes, so it includes the text within the content, but it doesn't allow you to build your own keyword set. That's something which I would say is still in development for Microsoft.
Can you do the same for sensitivity
Yes,
labels?
you can, absolutely. So that machine learning and auto application using metadata, it works across retention label and sensitivity labels.
Do you have sample use cases or template use cases?
I do. I can share with you offline. If you want to contact me, you have my details, and we'll be happy to kind of just show you around and some use case templates. So happy to do that.
Back to metadata with Lisa. If you use metadata, can you experience difficulties integrating it with the other applications such as Outlook?
Yes, yes, indeed. That's a very good point. And especially when we look at metadata, and if you're looking to deploy and managing records in Exchange, then there is very limited metadata. So we need to think very carefully. And if we especially want to have a consistent experience, then have essential metadata, which is driving some of your record management behaviors.
Okay, so Lawrence, I hope you fill in the information so that Vivek can get back to you. And I'll give Vivek your email. We have further questions. Do you have a sample schema for users to use to define appropriate records management?
Yeah, so we do have a retention schema. We also work with a partner company who have a database of retention schedules according to different regulations, etc. So we can definitely have a discussion about that.
Yeah. So Claire, if you've got your name on there, I will give Vivek your email address.
Any more questions? I just have two more quick slides to draw people's attention. Maria, is that okay?
Yes, yes, please do.
Okay, so some call to actions, as we said. One thing I would call out, apart from everything that I said, is compliance assessment. Invest in compliance assessment if you have questions and if you are interested about it. And if you are an E3 customer with 2,000 plus users, that assessment might be free of charge. And if you want to know more about it, please feel free to contact me. And then number four is the trial records management, and it's free. The license is free. So kind of if you are still questioning, do I need a third-party add-on product? Come and talk to us. Or go and talk to your Microsoft account manager. That trial is for 30-day period, and I would absolutely recommend you to kind of make use of it. And then finally, if you want to know more about this feature, we are hosting another webinar on 23rd of June. The details are in the pack, which you will get. And this time I will have Microsoft product engineering group with me who are going to talk about their product, roadmap, etc. And we are also going to talk about more how, this time we will pick teams, for example. So look forward to seeing some of you or all of you, if you can make the time. It's on 23rd of June. And finally, I have put some additional references here, which are Microsoft and Infotechtion references, including case studies. So we'll get that through the pack. So that's me, Maria, just a very quick whistle stop of the final slides. We have 1 more minute left if there are any other questions.
Yeah. Let me quickly check. Everybody says this has been great. It looks like we really need to plan for another session. And Melissa Laurie, I was going to say, we went on a tangent for Power Automate. There's a really great Microsoft guy named John Levesque, and he's very good. Get him on YouTube. I haven't really looked at the limitations of Power Automate because I am just amazed with all the stuff that it can do now. Everybody's saying thank you for this, and I've got responses. And guys, thank you. We will definitely plan another session with Vivek, because it looks like 1.5 hour is not enough, and there's still a lot of things that we need to get our deep dive on. So thank you very much, Vivek.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful and honored to show all of this to you, and I'm really excited if we have a next session. But I truly, truly, really appreciate you all joining in and dialing in and asking all those questions. I really appreciate it.
We're quite honored. Thank you so much, Vivek. And maybe we can do a deep brief tomorrow and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to
Yeah.
get that. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely afternoon, evening, whatever it is that you plan to do. And looking forward to seeing you at our next session.
And stay healthy wherever you are. Take care.
Yes,
Bye
keep
bye.
safe and healthy. Thank you. Thanks so much, Vivek.